The noise inside the auction hall was deafening, a cacophony of wealth, power, and ruthless ambition. Brilliant overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the assembled crowd, illuminating faces twisted with greed and calculation. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, thick with the scent of expensive cologne, leather, and the underlying metallic tang of money-changing hands. 9 highly trained dogs were being paraded before the gathered bidders, each one a specimen of canine excellence. Sleek Belgian Malinois with alert eyes and powerful haunches. Imposing Rottweilers with chest muscles that rippled beneath glossy coats. German Shepherds standing at attention with military precision, their intelligent gazes scanning the crowd as if they were already on duty. The bidders called out their offers with practiced ease, voices rising and falling in the ancient rhythm of commerce. Businessmen in tailored suits leaned forward eagerly. Security contractors made quick calculations on tablets. Private military companies sent representatives who nodded curtly to one another, sizing up both the merchandise and the competition. Each dog carried itself with the dignity of a warrior, muscles taut beneath shining fur, eyes bright with purpose and potential. They were magnificent creatures worth thousands of dollars, destined for elite roles, personal protection, military service, law enforcement. The auction house had never seen such quality specimens gathered in one place. Then came Lot 47. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few people began to chuckle, then laugh openly. Others shook their heads in disgust or pity. The auctioneer's expression faltered, his professional smile slipping for just a moment before he recovered his composure. The cage being wheeled onto the platform contained a German Shepherd, but not like the others. This one limped badly, dragging his right hind leg with each painful step. His coat, though clean, lacked the lustrous sheen of the other dogs. His ribs showed slightly beneath his fur, not emaciated but clearly underfed for some time. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle and shoulders, pale lines that told stories of violence and survival. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart from the others. Where the previous dogs had gazed out with confidence and alertness, this one's eyes held something far more complex, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion mixed with an almost human sadness. They were the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much, who had fought battles that left scars far deeper than the ones visible on his body. Eyes that had witnessed horrors and carried the weight of memories that would never fade. The nameplate on his cage read simply, Ranger. Lot number 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice lacking the enthusiasm that had marked his earlier presentations. Injured canine, limited usability. Starting bid, $10. The hall erupted in laughter. It wasn't kind laughter. It was the cruel mirth of people who measured worth only in utility and profit. $10? You'd have to pay me to take that mutt, someone shouted from the back row, triggering another wave of laughter. Look at him, can barely stand. What use is a guard dog that can't even walk properly? Called out another voice. Worthless! Absolutely worthless, declared a red-faced man in an expensive suit, shaking his head in exaggerated disgust. Should just put the poor thing out of its misery. Inside his cage, Ranger hung his head lower with each cruel comment. His breathing became more labored, not from physical exertion, but from something deeper. The crushing weight of rejection, of being found wanting and cast aside. His ears flattened against his skull, and his tail remained motionless, lacking even the faint hope of a wag. The auctioneer cleared his throat uncomfortably, scanning the room for any sign of interest. Minutes ticked by in uncomfortable silence, broken only by occasional snickers and whispered comments. The auctioneer had been in this business for 20 years, had sold everything from champion bloodlines to working dogs, but he had never felt quite this uncomfortable. There was something profoundly wrong about watching a living being, one who had clearly once been proud and capable, being reduced to this moment of public humiliation. Going once, the auctioneer said mechanically, without hope. Going twice. He raised his gavel, preparing to declare the lot unsold, which meant Ranger would likely be sent to a county facility or, more likely, euthanized. The dog was simply too damaged, too expensive to maintain, with no commercial value whatsoever. Last chance, folks. Anyone? Anyone at all? The auctioneer's voice had taken on a pleading quality. Even he, hardened by years in this business, couldn't quite stomach what was about to happen. The gavel began its descent. I'll buy him. The voice came from the back of the auction hall, clear and firm, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Every head in the room swiveled toward the source. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a shocked silence that felt almost physical in its intensity. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the late afternoon sun streaming in from outside. He wore a simple uniform, no medals, no ostentatious displays of rank, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded immediate attention. His posture was military perfect, shoulders back, chin level, feet planted with the confidence of someone who had faced far greater challenges than a room full of skeptical civilians. As he stepped forward into the better light, recognition rippled through the crowd like an electric current. It can't be... My God, it is him. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, walked steadily down the center aisle of the auction hall. His boots clicked against the concrete floor in a measured rhythm. He didn't hurry, didn't hesitate, didn't acknowledge the stunned faces turning toward him or the frantic whispers that followed in his wake. The auctioneer stood frozen, gavel still raised, mouth hanging open. In 20 years, he had never had a head of state walk into one of his auctions, let alone bid on anything. Especially not on a dog that everyone else had dismissed as worthless. "Mr. President," the auctioneer finally managed to stammer. "Sir, Are you certain? This dog is injured. He cannot work. He has limited—" "I heard your description," Ibrahim interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I know exactly what I'm buying. But, sir, with all due respect, there are far superior specimens here today. Military-grade animals, fully trained, in peak physical condition. If you require a protection dog or a companion, I can show you—" Ibrahim raised a hand, silencing the auctioneer politely. He moved past the man and approached Ranger's cage directly. The hall remained absolutely silent, hundreds of people holding their collective breath, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Ranger, who had kept his head down throughout the entire humiliating ordeal, slowly raised his eyes. He looked up at the man standing before his cage, and something passed between them in that moment, something wordless and profound that those watching could sense but not quite comprehend. Ibrahim crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the dog. His movements were slow and deliberate, non-threatening. He didn't reach for the cage bars, didn't make any sudden gestures. He simply looked at Ranger, and Ranger looked back. "I know who you are," Ibrahim said softly. His voice meant only for the dog's ears, though in the electric silence of the hall, many heard him anyway. "I know what you've been through. I know what you've done." Ranger's breathing steadied slightly. His ears, which had been flat against his skull, rose just a fraction. "I'm not here to use you," Ibrahim continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not here to put you back to work or extract whatever utility you might have left. I'm here to give you something you've never had." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm here to give you peace." A single tear tracked down Ranger's scarred muzzle. His tail, which hadn't moved in weeks, gave one small, tentative wag. Ibrahim stood and turned to face the auctioneer. "I'll pay whatever you're asking." "Sir, the starting bid was only $10. I couldn't possibly—" "Then I'll pay $1,000, Ibrahim said firmly. Not because that's his value in dollars and cents, but because every living being deserves dignity, especially those who have given everything in service to others. The auctioneer's eyes widened. "Sir, that's far too generous for— 10,000, Ibrahim interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And that's my final offer. Take it or leave it!" The crowd gasped. $10,000 for a crippled dog that had been worth $10 moments before? It made no economic sense, no practical sense, no logical sense whatsoever. But Ibrahim Traoré hadn't built a revolution on logic and economics. He had built it on justice, dignity, and the radical belief that every life had inherent worth. The auctioneer's hand trembled as he brought down the gavel. Sold. Lot 47 to President Ibrahim Traoré for $10,000. The sharp crack of wood against wood echoed through the hall like a gunshot, marking not an ending but a beginning. The beginning of a story that would change not just one broken soldier's life, but the heart of an entire nation. The rain had started before they left the auction hall, a gentle drizzle that quickly became a steady downpour, drumming against the roof of Ibrahim's vehicle as it pulled away from the facility. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, almost meditative. The only sounds were the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and the soft purr of the engine. Ranger sat in the back seat, his body pressed against the far door, trying to make himself as small as possible. Every few seconds, he would flinch at the sound of raindrops striking the windows or the occasional rumble of distant thunder. His breathing was rapid and shallow, the breathing of an animal that expected pain at any moment. Ibrahim watched him in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight. He had seen this before. The 1,000-yard stare, the hypervigilance, the way trauma etched itself into every muscle and nerve. He had seen it in his fellow soldiers after particularly brutal engagements. He had seen it in civilians who had survived atrocities during the civil conflicts that had plagued the region. He had, if he was honest with himself, seen it in his own reflection during the darkest days of the revolution. Post-traumatic stress wasn't limited to humans. Animals, especially highly intelligent ones like dogs who formed deep bonds and understood far more than people gave them credit for, could be devastated by abuse and violence. Ranger wasn't just injured in body. He was injured in soul. "It's okay," Ibrahim said softly, his voice barely audible over the rain. "You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you. Not ever again." Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but he didn't move otherwise. Trust, Ibrahim knew, would take time. Trust had to be earned, especially from someone who had been betrayed so thoroughly by those who were supposed to protect him. The presidential farm was located about 40 kilometers outside the capital, nestled in rolling hills covered with acacia trees and wild grasses. It wasn't ostentatious. Ibrahim had never been one for luxury or display. The compound consisted of a modest main house, several outbuildings, and expansive grounds where he could walk and think without the constant pressure of politics and governance weighing on his shoulders. As they pulled through the gates, Ranger lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of open land and growing things. His eyes widened just a fraction, taking in the sight of fields stretching toward the horizon, trees swaying in the wind, birds wheeling overhead in complex patterns. Ibrahim parked near the main house and sat for a moment, making no move to get out. He wanted to give Ranger time to acclimate, to understand that no immediate demands were going to be made of him. "This is home now," Ibrahim said, turning slightly in his seat to look back at the dog. "This is your home." Not a kennel, not a cage, not a place where you'll be trained and tested and judged. Just home. He opened his door slowly, stepping out into the rain. The water was warm against his skin, washing away the tension of the day. He walked around to Ranger's door and opened it, then stepped back, giving the dog space and choice. Ranger didn't move at first. He stared out at the open door, at Ibrahim standing in the rain waiting patiently, at the endless sky and the rolling fields beyond. His body trembled, not from cold, but from the overwhelming weight of possibility. For months, maybe years, he had existed in a state of constant threat. Every door that opened had meant potential pain. Every human voice had carried the promise of punishment or demand. He had learned to make himself invisible, to become small and quiet and utterly compliant, because that was the only way to minimize the suffering. But this was different. Ibrahim wasn't yelling, wasn't grabbing, wasn't forcing. He was simply standing there in the rain, hand extended in invitation rather than command, waiting for Ranger to make his own choice. Slowly, painfully, Ranger edged toward the door. He placed one paw on the ground, then another, testing the reality of this moment against the cruel lessons of his past. When no punishment came, when Ibrahim simply stepped back further to give him even more space, Ranger finally emerged fully from the vehicle. The rain hit his fur, cool and clean. washing away the lingering smell of the auction hall, the fierce sweat of dozens of animals, the harsh chemical cleaners, the stale air of confinement. He stood there for a long moment, face tilted slightly upward, letting the water run down his scarred muzzle. "Come," Ibrahim said gently, not as a command but as an invitation. "Let me show you around." He began walking toward the house, his pace slow and unhurried. Ranger followed at a distance, limping badly but keeping his eyes fixed on the man ahead of him. They passed by a garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. They walked past a small pond where ducks paddled contentedly, barely glancing at the newcomers. They stopped beneath an old acacia tree, its branches spreading wide overhead, offering shelter from the rain. Ibrahim sat down on a wooden bench beneath the tree, unmindful of the wet wood soaking through his uniform. He patted the ground beside him, not the bench, understanding that might be too presumptuous, but the earth itself. "You don't have to trust me yet," Ibrahim said, his voice carrying that same gentle firmness that had marked their first meeting. "Trust isn't something I can demand, but I want you to know something." Ranger had stopped a few meters away, watching him warily. "I had a dog once," Ibrahim continued, his eyes growing distant with memory. "His name was Kofi, a Belgian Malinois, the finest partner I ever had during my military service. We went through hell together, literally. Border patrols in hostile territory, counter-terrorism operations, peacekeeping missions where the peace was more theoretical than actual." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Kofi saved my life 3 times. Once he alerted us to an ambush before we walked into it. Another time, he took down an armed militant who had gotten past our perimeter and was seconds away from executing a squad of sleeping soldiers. And the third time," Ibrahim's voice broke slightly. He cleared his throat, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, though whether it was rain or tears was impossible to say. "The third time, he threw himself in front of a grenade. Didn't hesitate. Didn't think about it. Just saw the danger and acted. He saved 4 men that day. 4 men who went home to their families, who got to see their children grow up, who got to grow old and watch sunsets and live full lives." The rain continued to fall, creating a curtain of sound that enclosed them in their own private world. But Kofi didn't survive. He died in my arms before the medics could even reach us. And do you want to know the worst part? Ranger had moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in Ibrahim's voice. The worst part was that the military classified him as equipment, just another piece of gear that had been damaged and needed to be replaced. They sent me the standard form, equipment loss report, as if he was a rifle or a radio or a pair of boots, as if his life, his sacrifice, his loyalty meant nothing more than a line item in a logistics spreadsheet. Ibrahim looked directly at Ranger, and the dog saw tears streaming freely down the man's face now, mixing with the rain. "I swore that day that I would never let another soul, human or animal, be reduced to a piece of equipment. That I would never forget that every life, no matter how small or broken or damaged it might seem to others, has immeasurable worth." He held out his hand again, palm up, fingers slightly curled in a gesture that was part invitation, part plea. "That's why I came for you today, Ranger. Not because I need a guard dog, not because I want a companion, but because when I saw you in that cage, when I saw the way they laughed at you and dismissed you and treated you as if you were nothing, I saw Kofi. I saw every soldier who ever came home broken and was told they were no longer useful. I saw myself in some of the darker moments after the revolution when I wondered if all the sacrifice had been worth it." Ranger took another step closer, then another. His limp seemed less pronounced now, or perhaps it was just that he had stopped trying to hide it, stopped trying to minimize his own presence. "You don't owe me anything," Ibrahim continued. "You don't have to perform or prove yourself or earn your keep. You've already given more than any being should have to give. Now it's time to rest, time to heal, time to remember what it feels like to simply exist without fear." Ranger closed the final distance between them and very gently placed his head on Ibrahim's knee. It was the first voluntary touch, the first gesture of trust, and Ibrahim felt his heart break and heal simultaneously at the contact. He placed his hand on Ranger's head, fingers moving gently through the wet fur, finding scars and old wounds, bearing witness to pain he hadn't caused but wished desperately he could undo. They sat there together beneath the acacia tree while the rain fell around them, two soldiers finding solace in shared understanding, in the wordless recognition that some wounds never fully heal but can, perhaps, become bearable when carried together. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the farm, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The world seemed reborn, fresh, full of possibility. Ranger woke on a soft bed that Ibrahim had prepared for him in a corner of the main room, not shut away in some back room or outbuilding, but in the heart of the house where he could see and hear everything, where he would never feel isolated or abandoned. At first, he remained motionless, confused by the comfort, waiting for the inevitable demand or punishment. But minutes passed, then an hour, and nothing happened. No one came to drag him from the bed. No one shouted commands. No harsh hands grabbed at him. Eventually, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, non-threatening. Ibrahim emerged from his bedroom, already dressed for the day in simple work clothes. He glanced at Ranger but didn't approach directly. Instead, he moved to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast. The smell of food, real food, not the cheap, nutrition-minimal kibble Ranger had been fed before, filled the air. Fresh meat, rice, vegetables, simple fare by human standards. But to Ranger, who had been starving for kindness as much as sustenance, it smelled like heaven. Ibrahim prepared 2 plates, his movements unhurried and peaceful. He brought one to the low table near Ranger's bed and set it down gently, then retreated to his own seat several feet away. "Eat when you're ready," Ibrahim said casually, as if addressing a dinner guest rather than a damaged animal. "No rush, no demands. It's there whenever you want it." Ranger stared at the food, his stomach growling painfully. But years of abuse had taught him that food was often a trap, something offered only to be snatched away as punishment, or laced with something meant to make him sick, or used as leverage to force compliance. He glanced at Ibrahim, who was eating his own meal calmly, paying no special attention to the dog. The message was clear. This wasn't a test. There was no trick. The food was simply food, offered freely with no strings attached. After 10 agonizing minutes, Ranger finally moved. He approached the plate cautiously, sniffed it thoroughly, then took a small, tentative bite. The taste exploded across his tongue, rich, savory, nourishing. He ate slowly at first, then with increasing confidence until the plate was clean. Ibrahim smiled but said nothing. He simply collected both plates, washed them, and went about his day. This became their routine. Each morning, Ibrahim would prepare food and leave it available without force or expectation. He would work around the farm, tending to his small garden, maintaining the buildings, sitting on the porch with coffee and books. But he never demanded Ranger's attention or presence. The dog was free to come and go as he pleased, free to explore or hide, free to seek company or solitude. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ranger had agency, the power to make his own choices without fear of punishment. On the second day, Ranger ventured outside on his own. He limped across the yard, pausing frequently to sniff the air and assess his surroundings. He found the pond and watched the ducks for a long time, mesmerized by their peaceful contentment. He discovered a sunny patch of grass and lay down in it, feeling genuine warmth soak into his bones. Ibrahim watched from the porch, but made no move to interfere. When Ranger eventually limped back toward the house, uncertain of his welcome, Ibrahim simply patted the ground beside his chair in invitation. Ranger settled nearby, not touching, not quite ready for that level of intimacy, but closer than before. "You know what I think?" Ibrahim said conversationally, as if they were old friends discussing philosophy. "I think the hardest thing for any soldier to learn isn't how to fight. It's how to stop fighting." Ranger's ears swiveled toward him, listening. "We spend so long in survival mode, anticipating threats, planning escapes, never fully relaxing, that peace itself becomes terrifying. How do you trust peace when experience has taught you it's usually just the calm before the next storm?" He took a sip of his coffee, letting the words hang in the air. But here's what I've learned. Peace isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of safety. Not because nothing bad can ever happen, but because you know you're not facing it alone. Because you know there are people, or in my case, one very stubborn dog who will stand with you when the storms come. He looked down at Ranger, and the dog met his gaze steadily. I'm going to stand with you, Ranger. Through every nightmare, every moment of fear, every time the past tries to drag you back down. You're not alone anymore, and neither am I. That night, as Ibrahim sat by the fireplace reading, Ranger did something unprecedented. He rose from his bed in the corner, and after a long moment of visible internal struggle, walked across the room. He lowered himself to the floor directly beside Ibrahim's chair, close enough that his warmth was palpable. Ibrahim's breath caught. He set down his book very carefully and allowed his hand to rest gently on Ranger's head. "Welcome home, soldier," he whispered. "Welcome home." A week passed in relative peace. Ranger's limp became less pronounced as regular food and gentle exercise strengthened his muscles. His coat began to regain some of its luster. The haunted look in his eyes receded slightly, replaced by something that might, with time and patience, become contentment. Ibrahim had begun taking Ranger on short walks around the property, letting the dog set the pace and choose the direction. It was during one of these walks, on a morning when mist still clung to the low places and birds sang their territorial declarations, that everything changed. They were exploring the far western edge of the farm, an area Ibrahim rarely visited. It was overgrown and wild, reclaimed by nature after years of benign neglect. Ranger had been trotting ahead, moving with more confidence than ever before, when he suddenly stopped dead. His entire body went rigid. His ears stood straight up, swiveling to catch sounds Ibrahim couldn't hear. His nostrils flared as he scented the air with intense concentration. Ibrahim froze, trusting the dog's superior senses. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't answer, couldn't answer, but his body language spoke volumes. He had gone into alert mode, every muscle coiled and ready. But this wasn't the fearful alertness of a traumatized animal expecting attack. This was something else. The focused awareness of a trained working dog who had detected something significant. He began moving forward again. Slowly now, nose to the ground, following some trail invisible to human perception. Ibrahim followed, his hand moving unconsciously to his waist, where he once would have carried a sidearm. He was no longer active military, but old habits died hard. Ranger led him to a cluster of rocks partially hidden by overgrown brush. He began pawing at the ground near the largest stone, digging with intensity and purpose that went far beyond simple canine curiosity. "Hey, easy there," Ibrahim said, moving closer. "What have you found?" The dog ignored him, continuing to dig. Dirt flew behind him as he worked, his injured leg seemingly forgotten in his focus. After several minutes, his claws struck something solid that gave off a metallic scraping sound. Ibrahim's blood ran cold at that sound. He dropped to his knees beside Ranger and began helping to clear the dirt away with his hands. Together, they uncovered a small metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, sealed with waterproof latching and clearly not some forgotten piece of farm equipment. With trembling hands, Ibrahim pried open the latches. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a GPS tracking device, military-grade, still blinking with a small red light indicating active transmission. Beside it was a small transmitter and several electronic components he didn't immediately recognize. "Son of a bitch," Ibrahim breathed, his mind racing. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately planted surveillance equipment on his property. Someone had been watching him, tracking him, monitoring his movements and activities. Ranger sat back on his haunches, watching Ibrahim's face with those intelligent eyes. He whined softly, not in distress, but as if trying to communicate something urgent. Ibrahim looked at the dog with new understanding. "You knew. Somehow you knew this was here. You've smelled this before, haven't you? Back with your previous owner." He pulled out his satellite phone. He never used regular cell phones, not after discovering how easily they could be compromised, and placed a call to his head of security. "Kwame, I need you at the farm, now. and bring a full technical team. We have a situation. Within 2 hours, Ibrahim's property was swarming with security personnel, intelligence analysts, and technical experts. They swept the entire farm, finding 2 more tracking devices hidden in strategic locations, one near the main house, another by the vehicle garage. The chief intelligence officer, a weathered man named Amadou, who had served with Ibrahim during the revolution, brought his preliminary findings to the farmhouse where Ibrahim sat with Ranger at his feet. "Mr. President, these are FSB-grade trackers, Russian manufacture, military specification. They've been transmitting data for approximately 3 weeks, which corresponds with when I brought Ranger home," Ibrahim finished grimly. "Someone's been tracking us through him," Amadou nodded. "We're running the transmission signatures now, trying to identify the receivers. But, sir, there's something else you need to know." He pulled out a tablet and brought up a file. "I took the liberty of doing a deep background check on the dog's previous owner after you purchased him. The man who surrendered him to the auction wasn't just a civilian trainer." He turned the tablet to face Ibrahim. The screen showed a dossier complete with photographs, known associates, and a lengthy criminal record. Marcus Diabate, former military intelligence, dishonorably discharged 8 years ago for corruption. Since then, he's been linked to human trafficking operations, illegal arms deals, and, this is the important part, he's a known asset for foreign intelligence services looking to destabilize the region. Ibrahim's jaw clenched. "Go on." "According to our sources, Diabate specialized in something particularly insidious. He would take highly trained working dogs, bond with them, then use them to plant surveillance equipment in sensitive locations. The dogs were the perfect cover. Who suspects man's best friend? He'd send them to training at military or government facilities. They'd plant bugs or trackers, then he'd call them back." "And Ranger?" Ibrahim asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Ranger wasn't just abused, sir. He was a whistleblower of sorts. According to one of our informants, the dog refused to comply with Diabate's orders. Multiple times he barked and alerted people when Diabate was conducting his illegal activities. Twice he actually attacked Diabate when the man was beating other dogs into submission. Diabate couldn't kill him, that would raise too many questions, but he couldn't keep him either. So he dumped him at auction, figuring he was broken enough to never be a threat again." Ibrahim looked down at Ranger, who was watching the conversation intently, as if he understood every word. "Perhaps on some level he did, so when I bought him, you became a target," Amadou confirmed. "Diabate must have seen an opportunity. Plant trackers on the dog, let you take him home, and suddenly they have eyes on the president of Burkina Faso. They've been watching your routines, your security patterns, everyone who visits the farm." "Where's Diabate now?" Ibrahim asked, his voice deceptively calm. Amadou hesitated. "That's the other problem, sir. He disappeared 2 days ago. Our sources say he's gone to ground somewhere in the southern forests, near the old mining region. We believe he's with a cell of foreign operatives planning something. The intelligence is still fragmentary." Ibrahim stood, his decision made. "Then we go get him, tonight. Sir, with all respect, that's not your job anymore. You're the president. You can't what? Can't finish what I started?" Ibrahim's eyes flashed with the same fire that had fueled his rise to power. "This man has violated my home, threatened my security, and abused this animal who had the courage to stand up to him. I'm not sending others to handle what I can handle myself." He looked down at Ranger again, and this time he saw past the scars and the limp and the trauma. He saw what the dog had always been beneath it all: a warrior, a protector, a soul that refused to be broken even when every force aligned against him. "Besides," Ibrahim said quietly, "I won't be alone." "Will I, soldier?" Ranger rose to his feet, tail beginning to wag slowly. His eyes had lost their fearful cast entirely. In their place was something Ibrahim recognized from his own mirror during the revolution: righteous purpose. "Prep a tactical team," Ibrahim ordered Amadou. "Small, discreet, mobile. We move at dawn, and make sure we have a place for Ranger." "He's coming with us." "Sir, the dog is injured." "He's not trained for—" "That dog," Ibrahim interrupted firmly, Has more courage and integrity than half the soldiers I've commanded. He's proven that already. Now it's time we proved worthy of his trust. He knelt beside Ranger and looked the dog in the eyes. What do you say, soldier? Want to help me finish this? Want to make sure that man can never hurt anyone, human or animal, ever again? Ranger's response was immediate. He barked once, sharp, clear, and utterly confident. It was the first time Ibrahim had heard him make a sound beyond whimpers and whines. That's what I thought, Ibrahim said with grim satisfaction. Let's go to war one last time. The convoy left before dawn, moving through the darkness with lights off, navigating by GPS and night vision. 3 vehicles total, enough to handle any trouble, but small enough to move quickly and quietly. Ibrahim sat in the lead vehicle with Ranger beside him, the dog's head up, alert, scenting the air that rushed through the partially opened window. The intelligence team had narrowed Diabate's location to an abandoned mining complex deep in the southern forests, a maze of rusted equipment, collapsed tunnels and makeshift shelters that had become a haven for various criminal enterprises over the years. It was the perfect place to disappear, and equally perfect for an ambush. As they drew closer to the target zone, Ibrahim ordered the vehicles to stop. The team would proceed on foot from here, using the forest for cover. His tactical commander, a fierce woman named Lieutenant Amara who had fought beside him during the revolution, spread out a satellite map on the hood of the lead vehicle. 2 entry points, she briefed, her voice low and professional. Northern approach is more direct but exposed. Southern route takes longer, but provides better cover. Intelligence suggests 5 to 7 hostiles, possibly armed with automatic weapons. Unknown if they're expecting us. Ibrahim studied the map, then looked at Ranger. The dog was focused, his gaze fixed in the direction of their target. His nose worked constantly, processing information. We go south, Ibrahim decided. Ranger will take point. He knows Diabate's scent, and if there are any surprises waiting for us, he'll detect them before we walk into trouble. Lieutenant Amara looked skeptical. Sir, no disrespect to the animal, but relying on an injured dog for point is exactly what we're going to do, Ibrahim finished. I trust him with my life. Now let's move. The team formed up in tactical formation, 6 soldiers plus Ibrahim, moving silently through the pre-dawn darkness. Ranger moved ahead of them, his limp barely noticeable now as adrenaline and purpose overrode pain. Every few meters he would stop, nose testing the air, ears swiveling to catch the faintest sounds. Then he would move forward again, choosing paths that kept them in cover and away from potential kill zones. Ibrahim marveled at the transformation. This was no longer the broken, terrified creature from the auction house. This was a professional working dog, doing what he had been born and trained to do, his natural instincts and abilities undiminished despite everything he had endured. 20 minutes into their approach, Ranger froze. His body language changed subtly, head lowered, muscles coiled, utterly motionless. Ibrahim raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Everyone dropped to a crouch, weapons ready, scanning their surroundings. Ranger's gaze was fixed on a cluster of bushes 30 meters ahead. To the human eye, nothing appeared unusual. But the dog knew better. Ibrahim moved up beside Ranger, trusting the dog's senses completely. He pulled out his thermal scope and aimed it at the indicated position. There, a heat signature partially obscured by foliage. A sentry watching the southern approach. Ibrahim hand-signed to his team. 1 hostile concealed 12 o'clock. Amara nodded and moved her people into flanking positions. They could take him quietly without alerting the main compound. But before they could move, Ranger did something unexpected. He picked up a stone in his mouth, careful, deliberate, and carried it several meters to the left. Then he dropped it onto a patch of loose gravel. The stone clattered down the small embankment, creating noise 30 meters away from their actual position. The sentry's head snapped toward the sound. He whispered urgently into a radio, then moved to investigate, leaving his position exposed. 2 of Ibrahim's soldiers moved like shadows, closing the distance in seconds. A brief scuffle, barely audible, and the sentry was unconscious, zip-tied, and dragged into deeper cover. They had their first prisoner, and the alarm hadn't been raised. Ibrahim looked at Ranger with newfound respect. The dog hadn't just detected the threat, he'd created a tactical diversion to neutralize it. This was far beyond basic training. This was battlefield intelligence. They continued forward, Ranger leading them on a winding path that avoided 2 more sentries and what turned out to be a crude perimeter alarm system, tripwires attached to cans filled with rocks. Amateur hour compared to military-grade security, but effective enough to alert the compound to any direct approach, unless, of course, you had a dog who could smell the metal and cordage, and who was smart enough to lead the team around each trap. By the time they reached the perimeter of the mining complex, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and red. The old buildings loomed before them, concrete structures stained with rust and decay, windows broken, weeds pushing through cracked foundations. Ranger stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned back to look at Ibrahim. The message was clear. This is the place. Diabate is here. Ibrahim signaled his team to spread out and take positions. He checked his weapon, a simple sidearm, nothing fancy, and prepared for what came next. But before they could move, Ranger tensed again. A door at the rear of the largest building burst open, and 3 men emerged, weapons raised. They had been spotted! Contact! Lieutenant Amara shouted, returning fire as bullets began to shred the foliage around them. The morning erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the dim interior of the forest. The sharp crack of rifles mixed with shouted commands and curses. Ibrahim's team returned fire with disciplined precision, their military training evident in every movement. But Ranger didn't take cover. Instead, he bolted forward, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for an injured animal. He zigzagged across the open ground, using every scrap of cover, making himself a difficult target. "Ranger, no!" Ibrahim shouted, but the dog was beyond recall now. He was operating on pure instinct, the instinct that had been beaten and suppressed, but never fully extinguished. One of the gunmen tracked Ranger's movement and fired. Bullets kicked up dirt inches behind the running dog. But before the shooter could adjust his aim, Ranger reached him. The dog launched himself upward with tremendous force, jaws closing on the man's gun arm. His weight and momentum brought the shooter down hard, and the rifle went skittering across the ground. The man screamed, trying to shake off the dog, but Ranger held on with grim determination. One of Ibrahim's soldiers moved in and secured the shooter, forcing Ranger to release and move back. "Good boy," Ibrahim called out, even as the firefight continued around them. "Good boy, Ranger." 2 more hostiles emerged from the building, but they were met with overwhelming fire from Ibrahim's positioned team. Within minutes, the shooting stopped. 4 men lay on the ground, 3 unconscious, 1 with a minor gunshot wound to the leg. All were secured with zip ties and disarmed, but Marcus Diabate wasn't among them. "He's inside," Lieutenant Amara reported, consulting her tactical display. "Heat signature in the basement level. He's alone, possibly barricaded." Ibrahim moved toward the building entrance, Ranger at his side. The dog's breathing was heavy, but his eyes were locked on the doorway with laser focus. He knew who was inside. He could smell him. The scent of the man who had caused him so much pain, who had tried to break him, who had failed. "Stay close to me," Ibrahim murmured to the dog. "We finish this together." They entered the building carefully, clearing each room as they went. The interior was a nightmare of decay, rusted machinery, collapsed ceilings, pools of stagnant water reflecting the flashlight beams. Graffiti covered the walls, and the smell of rot and chemicals was overwhelming. A stairway led down into darkness. Ibrahim paused at the top, listening. He could hear something below, ragged breathing, the scrape of metal on concrete, the click of a weapon being loaded. "Diabate," Ibrahim called down. "It's over. Your men are in custody. The compound is surrounded. Come out peacefully," a voice echoed up from the darkness, harsh, desperate, tinged with madness. "Traoré, is that you? Did you bring my dog? That traitorous piece of shit that ruined everything?" "I brought him," Ibrahim replied calmly. "He's the one who found your surveillance equipment. He's the one who led us here. That worthless dog you threw away turned out to be smarter than your entire operation." A bitter laugh echoed up. "Of course he did. That dog was always too smart for his own good. Too moral, too righteous. Couldn't just follow orders like a normal animal. Had to have a conscience. Having a conscience isn't a weakness, Ibrahim said. It's what separates us from monsters, says the man who led a coup. Diabate spat back. Don't lecture me about morality, Traoré. We're both soldiers who decided the rules didn't apply to us. There's a difference, Ibrahim replied, his voice hardening. I fought to free my people from oppression. You traffic in human misery for profit. We are not the same. Idealist nonsense, Diabate shouted. Power is power. Money is money. In the end, we're all just trying to survive in a world that doesn't care whether we live or die. Ranger growled low in his throat, a sound of pure, focused anger. Ibrahim felt the vibration of it through the dog's body where they stood pressed together in the stairwell. You hear that? Ibrahim called down. That's the sound of justice coming for you. That dog you tried to destroy? He's about to watch you answer for every crime you've committed. Justice? Diabate's laugh was unhinged now. There is no justice. There's only the strong and the weak, the quick and the dead. And that dog should have been dead months ago. I should have put a bullet in his brain when I had the chance. Something shifted in Ranger at those words. The hackles rose along his spine. His growl deepened into something primal and terrifying. He's coming, Ibrahim said simply, and I won't stop him this time. Before Diabate could respond, Ranger exploded down the stairs. His injured leg didn't slow him at all now. Adrenaline and righteous fury had transformed him into something magnificent and terrible. He was no longer the victim. He was vengeance incarnate. The basement erupted with gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning, but Ranger moved like a ghost, like shadow, like the trained military dog he had always been. He dodged left, then right, using the rusted machinery and concrete pillars for cover exactly the way a human soldier would. Diabate's shots went wild, panic making his hands shake. He had faced down armed men, negotiated with terrorists, committed atrocities without flinching. But now, confronted with the living embodiment of his own cruelty coming for him in the form of an animal he had tortured, he broke. Ranger closed the distance in a heartbeat. His jaws found Diabate's gun arm, clamping down with crushing force. Bones cracked audibly. Diabate screamed and dropped the weapon. The dog drove him backward, slamming him against a concrete wall with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. But Ranger didn't go for the throat. Didn't tear into vital areas. Despite everything, all the abuse, all the pain, all the justified rage, the dog was still a protector at heart, not a killer. He held Diabate pinned, growling continuously, but he didn't inflict lethal damage. Ibrahim descended the stairs and flicked on a portable light. The scene illuminated before him was one he would remember for the rest of his life. Diabate, the feared criminal who had evaded justice for years, held at bay by a dog he had discarded as worthless. Poetic didn't begin to cover it. Ranger, release! Ibrahim commanded gently. The dog hesitated, then backed off, though he kept his eyes locked on Diabate. Lieutenant Amara and 2 other soldiers moved in quickly, securing the criminal with professional efficiency. Diabate looked up at Ibrahim with eyes full of hatred and fear. You can't prove anything. I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll be out in a week. Ibrahim smiled coldly. I don't think so. You see, while you've been hiding down here feeling sorry for yourself, my technical team has been going through your computers. We found everything. The trafficking routes, the weapons deals, the foreign intelligence contacts. We found evidence of 17 murders, including 3 children, and we found something else, too. He pulled out his phone and showed Diabate a video. It was surveillance footage from one of Diabate's own cameras, showing him personally executing a government informant. You kept trophies, Ibrahim said with disgust. Recordings of your crimes, because you were so arrogant, so certain you were, untouchable, that you wanted to be able to relive your triumphs. Diabate's face went pale. That arrogance destroyed you, Ibrahim continued, and it was destroyed by a dog, an animal you thought was too broken to matter. Tell me, how does it feel to be brought down by someone you considered beneath you? Diabate had no answer. As the soldiers hauled him to his feet and began the long walk back to the vehicles, back to justice, back to a cell he would likely never leave, he kept his eyes on Ranger. The dog stared back unflinchingly, no longer afraid, no longer broken. Outside, the sun had fully risen, bathing the clearing in golden light. The rest of the team had secured the compound and were beginning the careful process of collecting evidence. Ibrahim stood with Ranger, both of them breathing hard from the exertion and adrenaline. "You did it," Ibrahim said, kneeling to embrace the dog properly for the first time. "You faced your demon and you won, not with violence, not with revenge, but with courage and integrity. You're everything a soldier should be." Ranger leaned into the embrace, and Ibrahim felt the dog's body finally completely relax. The war was over. The battle was won. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a broken soul had been healed. The journey back to the capital was triumphal, though Ibrahim had tried to keep it low-key. Word had already spread through the intelligence community about what had happened. A daring raid led by the president himself, with a rescued dog playing a crucial role in bringing down a major criminal network. By the time their convoy reached the outskirts of the city, people had begun lining the streets. At first, it was just a few curious onlookers, then dozens, then hundreds. They held signs and banners, many of them featuring crude but heartfelt drawings of a German shepherd. Ranger the hero. Even broken wings can fly, never give up, from auction to legend. Ibrahim looked at the crowds with amazement, then down at Ranger, who was watching the people with alert curiosity. The dog had no idea he had become a symbol, a living embodiment of resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances. The media was waiting at the presidential residence. Cameras flashed as Ibrahim emerged from the vehicle with Ranger at his side. Reporters shouted questions, jostling for position, their voices creating a wall of noise that would have been overwhelming for anyone, let alone a dog who had spent recent months in abuse and isolation. But Ranger handled it with surprising grace. He stayed close to Ibrahim's side, his body language calm and confident. When the president stopped to address the gathered press, the dog sat at attention beside him, looking for all the world like a trained military working dog at an official ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ibrahim began, waiting for the noise to subside. 3 weeks ago, I attended a dog auction. I went there looking for nothing in particular, just following an impulse I didn't fully understand at the time. What I found was a German shepherd named Ranger, injured and dismissed by everyone present as worthless. He paused, letting his words sink in. But that worthless dog turned out to be one of the most valuable individuals I've ever met. He showed me courage. He showed me integrity. He showed me that sometimes the things society discards are actually treasures we were too blind to recognize. The cameras focused on Ranger, who looked up at Ibrahim with those intelligent eyes. This dog uncovered a surveillance operation on my property. He led a tactical team through hostile territory without a single casualty. He helped capture a dangerous criminal who has been evading justice for years. And he did all of this while still recovering from abuse and injury. Ibrahim's voice grew thick with emotion. Ranger didn't do these things because he was trained to. He didn't do them because he was ordered to. He did them because he has an innate sense of right and wrong, a moral compass that wouldn't let him stay silent in the face of evil, even when staying silent would have been safer. He is, in every meaningful sense, a better person than many humans I've known. The crowd had gone completely silent, hanging on every word. So today, I am pleased to announce that Ranger will be awarded the National Medal of Courage, the first animal ever to receive this honor. Because heroism isn't about species or ability or whether you walk on 2 legs or 4. It's about character. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you everything. And by that measure, Ranger is one of the greatest heroes this nation has ever known. The crowd erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very air. People were crying openly, holding up their phones to capture the moment. Children waved enthusiastically, calling Ranger's name, and the dog, sensing somehow that this was an important moment, stood on his 3 good legs and held his head high, accepting the adulation with dignity. The medal ceremony took place a week later, giving the nation time to properly prepare for an event that had captured the collective imagination. The grand hall of the presidential palace had never been so packed. Dignitaries, military personnel, foreign ambassadors, journalists, and regular citizens who had won lottery slots to attend all crowded together. But the star of the show stood calmly at Ibrahim's side, wearing a new collar that had been specially crafted for the occasion. Fine leather with brass fittings, elegant but not ostentatious. The National Orchestra played as Ibrahim and Ranger made their way to the stage. The crowd rose to its feet in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Old soldiers wept openly, remembering their own K9 partners. Parents held up their children so they could see the hero dog. Even the foreign diplomats, usually so carefully neutral, couldn't help but smile. The ceremony itself was relatively brief by government standards. The Minister of Defense read the official citation, detailing Ranger's actions and the impact they had on national security. Then Ibrahim stepped forward with the medal, a beautiful bronze piece on a blue ribbon designed specifically for this presentation. "Ranger," Ibrahim said formally, kneeling to look the dog in the eyes, "by the authority vested in me as President of Burkina Faso, I present you with the National Medal of Courage, with full honors and privileges thereof." He draped the medal around Ranger's neck, adjusting it so it lay properly against the dog's chest. The cameras captured every moment. The serious expression on Ibrahim's face, the way Ranger sat perfectly still and attentive, the visible emotion shared between man and dog. "You have served your country with distinction," Ibrahim continued, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. "You have embodied the highest ideals of service, sacrifice, and integrity. You are and always will be a soldier worthy of honor." Ranger did something then that surprised everyone. He raised his right paw and placed it in Ibrahim's hand, the canine version of a handshake, a gesture of mutual respect between partners. The crowd lost its composure entirely. The applause was thunderous, mixed with cheers and shouts, and the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that happens when people witness something genuinely beautiful and true. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Ranger was the star, naturally, but he handled it all with remarkable patience. Children wanted to pet him, which Ibrahim carefully supervised, teaching them how to approach gently and respectfully. Veterans wanted to shake his paw and share stories of their own K9 partners. Artists wanted to sketch him. Photographers wanted portraits. Through it all, Ranger remained gracious, seeming to understand that all of this attention was coming from a place of love and respect rather than threat or demand. But Ibrahim noticed the dog was getting tired. It had been a long day, and for all the progress Ranger had made, he was still recovering from years of trauma. Ibrahim made their excuses and extracted them both from the celebration, heading back to the quiet sanctuary of the farm. As they drove through the night, Ranger dozed in the passenger seat, his head resting on Ibrahim's thigh, the metal glinting softly in the passing streetlights. "You did good today, soldier," Ibrahim said softly. "Rest now. You've more than earned it." In the weeks following the ceremony, Ranger's story took on a life of its own. International news organizations picked it up. Documentary producers came calling. Children's book authors wanted to tell his tale. Social media was flooded with fan art, poems, and messages of support from around the world. But the most profound impact was on Burkina Faso itself. Ranger had become a national symbol, and with that symbolism came change. Animal welfare organizations, which had long struggled for funding and attention, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with donations and volunteers. Shelters that had been on the brink of closing were able to expand. Spay and neuter programs reached underserved communities. Laws regarding animal cruelty were strengthened and actually enforced. More importantly, people began looking at the discarded and overlooked with new eyes. The crippled street dog that everyone ignored? Someone started a fundraiser for veterinary care. The child with disabilities that the school system had written off? Suddenly there were tutors and advocates fighting for proper education. The elderly grandmother living alone and forgotten? Neighbors began checking in, bringing food, offering companionship. Ranger's story had reminded an entire nation that worth isn't determined by utility or perfection, that the broken can be healed, that the discarded can become treasures, that everyone, human or animal, deserves a chance at redemption. Ibrahim watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. This was what he had fought for during the revolution, not just political change, but a fundamental shift in how people valued each other and all living things. Ranger, for his part, settled into a peaceful routine. His days were spent exploring the farm, basking in the sun, playing gentle games with Ibrahim. His limp never fully disappeared, but it bothered him less and less. The scars remained, but they faded. The nightmares that had once plagued him became less frequent, then rare, then stopped altogether. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in his eyes. The haunted, desperate look was completely gone, replaced by contentment, peace, and something that looked remarkably like joy. 2 years after the rescue, Ibrahim received an unexpected visitor at the farm. It was the auctioneer, the man who had tried to sell Ranger for $10, who had presided over the dog's humiliation. He arrived in a modest car, hat in hand, looking nervous and ashamed. Ibrahim met him at the gate with Ranger at his side. The dog showed no aggression toward the man, just calm assessment. "Mr. President," the auctioneer began, his voice shaking slightly, "I wanted to apologize. To you, but more importantly, to him." He looked down at Ranger. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and in all that time, I treated animals like products, like things to be bought and sold, valued only for what they could do or how much they could earn. I never really saw them as beings with their own worth." He took a deep breath. "Watching what Ranger has become, seeing how you valued him when no one else did, it changed something in me. I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. So I shut down the auction house." Ibrahim's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I've spent the last year working with animal rescue organizations," the man continued, "trying to undo some of the harm I caused, trying to help others see what I was too blind to see for so long." He knelt down carefully, respectfully, and looked Ranger in the eyes. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry I let people mock you. I'm sorry I almost gave up on you. You deserved so much better." Ranger studied the man for a long moment. Then slowly his tail began to wag. He moved forward and gently pressed his nose against the man's hand. A gesture of forgiveness that brought tears streaming down the auctioneer's face. "Thank you," the man whispered. "Thank you for being better than I was." After the auctioneer left, Ibrahim and Ranger took their evening walk around the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, purple, and gold. Birds sang their evening songs. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of growing things. They stopped beneath their favorite acacia tree, the same tree where they had first truly connected 2 years before. Ibrahim sat on the bench, and Ranger lay at his feet, comfortable and content. "You know what you've done?" Ibrahim said, speaking more to himself than to the dog. "You've reminded us all what it means to be human, to see value in the overlooked, to offer second chances, to judge beings not by their past or their physical condition, but by the content of their character." Ranger's tail thumped against the ground softly. "People call you a hero," Ibrahim continued. "They give you medals and honors and write songs about you. But I think your greatest achievement isn't what you did in that compound or during the rescue operation. It's simpler than that." He reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ears, exactly the way the dog liked best. "Your greatest achievement is that you refused to let cruelty make you cruel. You refused to let abuse turn you bitter. You kept your moral compass even when the world gave you every reason to lose it. You remained fundamentally good." The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. The farm was quiet except for the gentle sounds of night creatures beginning their routines and the soft rhythm of two hearts beating in comfortable companionship. "That's the real lesson," Ibrahim said softly. "Not that broken things can be fixed, though that's true. Not that the discarded can become valuable, though that's also true. The real lesson is that goodness exists independent of circumstance. That who we are isn't determined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us." Ranger let out a contented sigh, his body completely relaxed. "You're my teacher as much as I'm your rescuer," Ibrahim admitted. "Maybe more so. You've taught me about resilience, about grace, about forgiveness. You've taught me that leadership isn't about being the strongest or the smartest or the most powerful. It's about recognizing value in others, especially when they can't see it in themselves." He looked up at the stars, thinking about the unlikely journey that had brought them both to this moment. A revolutionary who became a president, and a discarded dog who became a national hero. "Thank you, soldier," Ibrahim whispered. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for choosing to heal rather than hate. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Ranger lifted his head and placed it on Ibrahim's knee, the same gesture he had made on that first rain-soaked day. But this time, there was no fear in the touch, no hesitation, no doubt, just love, just trust. Just two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment, and in finding each other, had found themselves, above them. The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Around them, the farm breathed with peaceful life. Within them, wounds that had once seemed fatal had healed into scars that told stories of survival and triumph. And in a small house in the capital, a child went to sleep clutching a stuffed toy dog, dreaming of growing up to be as brave as Ranger. In a shelter across the country, a volunteer looked at a three-legged cat everyone said was unadoptable and thought, "If Ranger got his chance, so will you." In homes and schools and government offices, people made different choices, kinder choices, more compassionate choices, because a dog had reminded them what was possible when you looked past the surface to see the soul beneath. Ranger's story wasn't really about a dog at all. It was about all of us, about our capacity for cruelty and our capacity for kindness, about how we measure worth and who we choose to value, about second chances and redemption and the unbreakable resilience of the spirit, about how sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we almost left behind under the vast African sky. With stars blazing overhead and the earth solid beneath them, Ibrahim and Ranger sat together in perfect peace. Two soldiers, two survivors, two souls who had found home not in a place but in each other. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The end.